Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 6, no hope difficulty, no life cube loss walkthrough, and this is chapter 1 of Leon's campaign. And for this walkthrough, I'm going to be doing all the campaigns of Resident Evil 6 without losing a single life cube, because no damaging this game isn't possible. So to accommodate for this, I'm going to do the entirety of Resident Evil 6 without losing a single life cube. And if you're wondering what I mean, look at the bottom right. Do you see the 6 squares down there that indicate my health? Well, I'm not going to lose a single one of those. I will take partial damage every so often that won't fully drain one of the cubes, and that's actually allowed, but if I lose one of those cubes, I have to restart the checkpoint, and you're not going to see any moments of me restarting the checkpoint, thankfully, because this is a walkthrough, and what would the walkthrough be if it included all those moments? And this is the first time I'm ever doing such a restriction. I don't even think Lightning Fidelis has done such a restriction. I don't even think Ellen has done this. I don't think Fascinator has done this. So it's going to be very interesting playing the game with such a restriction, because it means I have to be so cautious, very cautious. But at the same time, I want to demonstrate Resident Evil 6's potential, because this is the most mechanically advanced Resident Evil game in all of existence. And not only that, but I also want to make this walkthrough as a way to smite SHAREfactory's shitty walkthrough of Resident Evil 6, because he made quite possibly the worst walkthrough of Resident Evil 6, and he has influenced so many of his fans to hate the game so much that he's just giving this game a bad reputation. And I'm going to call him out so many times, because what he did for his Resident Evil 6 walkthrough is just completely unforgivable, let me tell you. And you can clearly sense a personal motive in this as well, because as I've already mentioned in my Resident Evil 5 walkthrough, SHAREfactory decided to call me out on his Twitch livestream of Resident Evil 5 by saying he's played Resident Evil 5 longer than I have, so he understands the game better. And I imagine if I were to present him with the same case with Resident Evil 6, he would say the exact same thing, despite the fact that his walkthrough of Resident Evil 5 and 6 display some of the most simple, most average, most unintelligible methods ever. It almost felt like he was a deer in headlights. That's how lost he was in those walkthroughs. But let's not focus on SHAREfactory right now, because we're at the beginning of the game. It's probably best I explain some things. So Resident Evil 6 is a very controversial Resident Evil game because of how action-oriented it is. But I think it is still a Resident Evil game. It feels like a Resident Evil game. It feels more like a Resident Evil game than Resident Evil 2 Remake, in all honesty, because it doesn't abandon the mechanical innovations that Resident Evil is known for. And it has a lot of enemy types. All the enemy types feel interesting, more so than Resident Evil 2 Remake's enemy types. And there's just so many cool things to experiment with in Resident Evil 6. Like this. This is the counter system, a system that SHAREfactory ignored so much in his walkthrough for no reason, even though he claims to be a fighting games expert. He plays a lot of fighting games. But why he ignored this mechanic is beyond me. If he had actually used this mechanic properly, maybe he wouldn't be struggling with Resident Evil 6 in his walkthrough. But I don't know. I don't know what goes on in SHAREfactory's head. I don't know if he was intentionally trying to play bad to make Resident Evil 6 look bad. It doesn't make any sense. So, on the melee system, do you notice the bar that is refilling right now? That is the stamina bar. The stamina bar is a new feature that Resident Evil 6 has. It's a way to prevent people from being too over-reliant upon melee or being too speedy, and it forces the player to be very cautious, because the stamina bar will drain when you're doing specific melee attacks. It will drain when you are doing quick shots. And like I said, it's all done to force you to be cautious. Now there are several ways of waiting for the stamina bar to regenerate. The first thing is, of course, standing still, but it regenerates very slowly if you do it like that. The best way to regenerate stamina is to lie down on the ground and not do anything, because the stamina bar just regenerates so fast. You can also go into cover, and it will regenerate at the same rate. The other way of regenerating stamina is to use a green herb, and that's what I'm going to be using the green herbs for in this walkthrough, because I won't be using it for healing purposes, since I won't be losing any life cubes. And on that note, there are several moments in Leon's campaign and Ada's campaign that have certain mandatory damage moments, but that's more so due to the fact that you don't have access to certain skills in no hope difficulty. The skill system is completely locked. If I had the breakout ability that is only available on the other difficulties, I could probably do a section that is impossible to do no damage on no hope difficulty. So when those moments do happen, I'm just gonna make note of them and just exclude them from the restrictions. Every other damage I'm going to be avoiding.
Keep that trigger finger ready. Never know.
Now Resident Evil 6 has a lot more enemies this time around, compared to the older Resident Evil games where you were mainly fighting 2 or 3 enemies per room. It's all because of the fact that they wanted to portray the scenario, what would happen if you were in an actual city that was under bioterror threat. And of course, that makes sense. You're on a college campus. There's a lot of students on campus, so of course you're going to be fighting all of them.
There's no way out.
I like the fact that it takes this approach. It feels a lot more realistic. You know, it doesn't make any sense to fight just 2 or 3 enemies per room when you're in the middle of a city and that's in the midst of a bioterror outbreak. And it definitely adds a new layer of challenge to the Resident Evil series. And this all started with Resident Evil 4, and Resident Evil 4 really changed the series in a way that just made it stand out from other game series. But unfortunately, Resident Evil 2 Remake reverted the series back to its original state when it first released. Not that the older Resident Evil games were bad. I mean, they were a lot of fun. It's just they didn't feel so innovative like these games did. You know, I think these games do survival horror better, and you know, their enemy types actually feel a lot more dangerous. You know, these enemy types are very fast, all because of the fact that you yourself are more capable. And this all started in Resident Evil 3, actually, and Resident Evil 4 expanded upon it further. But, what's happening right now is that we're being assailed by a bunch of enemies, and we're on a timer. So try to hold off the enemies as best as you can. There are, several methods you, definitely need to know for Resident Evil 6. So, that right there is important. When you stun certain enemies, you have the ability to punish their flinch animations. In Resident Evil 4, this was the very first game to do it, but it was very limited because you could only punish head moves and leg moves. On Resident Evil 5, you were able to punish the arms, but on Resident Evil 6, you can punish all sorts of animations. So long as the enemies are in a stun state that lasts for at least a second. And it can prove very advantageous, but the thing that Serpent 17 got wrong in this walkthrough is the way to initiate certain moves called coup de grace. Because he was completely unaware of how to trigger coup de grace, and the way you trigger coup de grace, which are specific high-powered melee attacks, is to stun an enemy twice. So oftentimes what you'll see me doing is doing the quick shot, and then sliding into enemies, because that's how you stun them twice. That's the most efficient way to stun them. You can also get behind them and kick them, and then get in front of them, and then melee them there, and that's another method. Like, essentially, 2 soft stuns equals 1 very hard stun that will allow you to do the coup de grace, and coup de grace give you iframes. And this is something different in Resident Evil 6 with the way they've handled the iframes now. On Resident Evil 4 and 5, they gave you iframes during every single melee animation, but on this game, when you do just the normal melee attacks, like for instance, when you're just doing the melee attack after a soft stun, where Leon does just the simple reverse roundhouse kick, it doesn't give you iframes. You'll know when the melee animation gives you iframes when it does these specific camera moments where it goes into a cammed animation where the camera kind of does this fancy effect like this. You see how it just closes in on Leon? Well, whenever the camera does that, it means you're invulnerable. And you need to understand this if you want to stay alive in this game. But bear in mind, the enemies on this game are very keen on trying to ambush you when you come out of those iframes. So you've got to be very careful when going for melee attacks on this game. The amount of times I've gone for a melee attack without thinking about it, and I've been hit outside the iframes, is very annoying, but it's something that is caused by me, because I'm not thinking straight. You know, it's always exciting to go for those melee attacks, and it can definitely help in crowd control. But if you do it at the most inopportune time, you're going to get punished severely, and this game really stresses upon that punishment greatly. And if you saw just then, when I did the counter attack on that one guy with the axe, I hit the other enemy. That right there is one of the coolest things that Resident Evil does only. You know, there's a lot of games out there that have these systems of punishing flinch animations with an animation, but they never ever try to make it so that you can hit multiple enemies with a melee attack that's focused specifically on one enemy. And this is not the case with the Resident Evil series. In Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 and the Not a Hero DLC, the melee attacks can affect multiple enemies, not just a single enemy that the melee attack is focused on, which is really beneficial, because as I've already mentioned, there's so many enemies, and you need to understand how to control the horde if you want to stay alive. And right there was the quick shot. If you see any moments where I do the quick shot with the knife, just know it's not intentional. Because for some unknown reason, when you quick shot with the knife, it has two different inputs. Because to do the quick shot, you have to press L2 and R2 at the same time. But for the knife, for some reason, if you press if you hold L2 and then you press R2 and pull up on the left analog stick at the same time, you'll do the knife quick shot. And it has gotten me screwed so many times. The amount of times I've done it on accident and then I've been caught in the recovery frames of that quick shot animation is very frustrating. So be very careful when going for knife hits. And we're just doing this one right now. You don't have to like search each individual part of this camera sequence. You can just stay on one particular sequence, wait for the prompt to appear, and then just do it. Just follow what I do and you'll be fine. I mean, I don't even think anyone's ever died in this. If people have actually died on this part, that'd be hilarious. But you're about to see me recover my stamina by lying down on the ground and not doing anything, because as you can see, the stamina bar is regenerating very quickly. And you need to get into the habit of doing that if you want to stay active at all times. So we're about to enter the subway station, and during this time I'm going to talk about some fundamental systems with Resident Evil 6. One of the biggest complaints about this game is the movement, and it's definitely understandable why a lot of people can hate the movement on this game, because the movement on this game, while it is very fluid and it's not a tank control based system, because of course you're fighting very fast enemies and therefore the developers have to make you a lot faster as well. There are times when the movement can feel a little loose, where the characters will sometimes go off in a particular direction for about a second, even though you're pulling the left analog stick in another direction. It's mainly due to how heavy a lot of the turning animations are in this game. But to avoid this issue, you can pretty much just aim. If you aim, the characters will just stand still, and it helps avoid the clunky movement at times. And a couple of things to note about the movement: you can now dodge on this game. There is actually a way to dodge that's not context sensitive. If you aim and you press X and move the left analog stick at the same time, your character will evade in a particular direction. This can change sometimes depending on the weapon you're equipping. Like for instance, when I had my knife out, Leon was dodging in a different way. He was not rolling to the left or right, he was just kind of stepping to the left or right.
There was no one at the controls.
I don't like that particular dodge animation that he does, because it doesn't change your hitbox in the slightest. It opens you up to the enemy attacks very easily. Oh, and before I go on with this point, we're coming across the dog enemies now, and the dogs in this game are very fair. They die in one hit from a counter attack. But this enemy type can be very dangerous. It can tear apart your life very easily. But this is an important tip to note about the dogs. If you go prone, they can't hit you, because the dogs are only able to do a jump attack, and of course, since I'm lying on the ground, they can't hit me. And as you see, I've mastered the counter timing, but I wanted to also shoot these dogs out of the air, because that is also a Resident Evil thing of being able to shoot enemies out of the air. That's another good alternative to the counter system, if you're not confident. The dogs die very quickly from the shotgun as well. If you have the shotgun, and you're very close to them, and you're prone, you can easily down them and get rid of them. So going back to my previous topic about the dodge that Leon does when he has his knife out, where he just kind of turns to the left or right, is a really bad animation. It can help for certain attacks, but I think being able to roll is a lot better, because the dodge that Leon does when he has his knife out is not advantageous in the slightest. It doesn't cause him to go down on the ground at all. He just kind of has the same exact hitbox as if he's standing. And unless you're dealing with a completely vertical attack, it's not helpful in the slightest. It's one of the main reasons why I don't like playing as Chris when he's using his knife, because Chris is even more limited in the kind of dodges he has, because only one particular dodge animation will allow him to roll when he has his knife out, and that's when he's rolling forward. And rolling forward, why would you want to roll forward to avoid an attack? I mean, it's helpful for certain attacks, but for most of these attacks you kind of need to roll left or right, or dodge backwards.
How's that for timing?
That just seems like the more logical approach, but for some reason when you dodge backwards with Chris when he has his knife out, he just kind of does a double slash and he takes a step backwards, and it's not advantageous in the slightest, because for the most part in Chris's campaign you're going to be fighting enemies with guns. And I've mentioned this a lot in so many of my Resident Evil live streams. The guns on this game are very unfair. They're really bad. They're poorly designed. They can stun lock you to death, because it only takes one loss of a life cube to start doing the stumble animation, and then they can just shoot you while you're being stumbled, and then they can shoot you through the geometry. They are very inconsistent when it comes to reloading. You'll definitely see a lot of instances like that in my Resident Evil live streams, but I don't think you'll see them once in my Chris campaign or Jake campaign live stream, because of course, if I go into the stumble animation, it means I've lost a life cube, so I would have to restart. But I can guarantee when I do those campaigns, it is going to be so annoying. I mean, the only other tip I can give you to deal with those guys is to use the third-person cover trick, but you can only use it when you have the reticle, because as you'll notice, I'm using the laser sight, which is the classic Resident Evil system of aiming. But I definitely recommend using the reticle for Chris's and Jake's campaign.
We're not getting that open.
Because using the third-person cover trick is very advantageous. Never use the cover system. The cover system on this game is really bad. It's nowhere near as bad as Operation Raccoon City's cover system. The cover system on that game is horrible. It's probably the worst cover system I've ever seen in a game. I mean, Servant17 would say that Kane and Lynch 2 has the worst cover system, but I've never played Kane and Lynch 2, and we're talking about Resident Evil. And Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City's cover system is trash. For one thing, the way to go into cover is to just move into the cover, and that can oftentimes screw with your movement, because it's very sensitive to you just moving into that cover. And then when you put yourself in cover behind a wall, a very high wall, shooting from that position is not very good at all, because the game has a lot of issues with placing you correctly so that you can actually fire behind that piece of cover. And the only possible way to guarantee that the game will actually allow you to fire behind that wall is to put yourself slightly out of the cover. And because of the fact that a portion of your body is outside of the cover, the enemies can hit you while you're in cover. It's not just with that particular case, they can even hit you behind waist-high objects, which doesn't make any sense at all. And then shooting from cover is made even more annoying by the fact that the game has to prioritize the reticle or the laser sight, but you have both of those particular aiming sights in Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, and it's not like the game even needed those, because the aiming on that game is very inaccurate. And that's why I primarily use the submachine gun on Operation Raccoon City, because that's the only good weapon that's accurate. And I know these experiences of Operation Raccoon City, because I played it with Fascinator the other day, and I was hoping my opinions of Operation Raccoon City would change, but sadly it didn't. It only served to make it worse on my opinions of Operation Raccoon City. But back to Resident Evil 6 with the cover system. Going into cover on this game is stupid, because it's the same button as aiming. The amount of times I have gone into cover on accident when I'm trying to aim at an enemy, and then I've been hit in the process, is so stupid on this game. I have no idea what Capcom was thinking when they designed that system of going into cover. I wish they just made it like Resident Evil 5, where if you press square, your characters just go into cover, and then you can just aim from cover, and then the cover system is actually responsive, and you're not getting any moments where you're getting screwed by aiming. Like, why did they change the input for the cover? That just doesn't make any sense to me in the slightest. I mean, I get, you know, like, square is your reload button, but still, though, you know, you can't just make it like X or something. Like, for the waist-high cover on this game, if you aim and you press X, you'll go into waist-high cover, and that's perfectly fine. Why can't it be the same system with going behind high walls? Is it that hard, Capcom? Like, this issue has been such a big thing in every single one of my playthroughs of Resident Evil 6. But, right there, place a remote bomb, because there's a whole bunch of zombies that are going to come after you, and these guys can fire acid. You can counter the acid attack if you want to. It's just very risky, because the timing on it is very strict. However, Lightning Fidelis showed me a useful tip to note about countering on this game. When you drop your aim, like you just release L2, if you mash R2 during that particular frame data, you will get the counter very quickly. You won't have to be so strict on the timing. You can just mash R2 during the frame data for dropping your aim, and you will be able to get the counter every time. It's very useful against certain bosses like Lepotitsa, because Lepotitsa has a very strict counter, and if you use that trick against Lepotitsa, you can easily counter that boss. I just never choose to do it, because I prefer using the knife against Lepotitsa, because dodging Lepotitsa is very easy, because Lepotitsa is a boss that tricks a lot of people into thinking that getting close to it is a bad idea, but getting close to Lepotitsa is actually a good thing, because Lepotitsa can only ever do one attack, which is just the grab.
Good, you made it. You can reach the
And the grab is so fair, because you can just dodge away from it. And they have a very high recovery after the grab, and you can just re-engage the loop. Perfect.
Keep your lines open in case you run into
But I'll get to that fight in Chapter 2. Right here, roll away quickly. That happens a lot, where your AI partner accidentally shoots a tank, and you take damage. So you gotta be very careful. That happened to Seraphim 17 in this walkthrough. All because of the fact that he didn't try to use the roll in the slightest. For the most part, Seraphim 17 ignored the roll like 90% of the time. Or not even 90%, like 95% of the time. Because he's like, oh, the commander roll is stupid. The fact that you have to aim is stupid. It's not helpful in the slightest. Well, maybe if he actually used the roll more often, he wouldn't be getting hit all the time and then calling the game bullcrap. His whole entire walkthrough is literal bullcrap. It's literally bullcrap personified perfectly. Because he is just so dishonest with a lot of his claims of Resident Evil 6. I swear to God. But enough about that. Let's just get back to what's happening right now in the video. We're currently traversing Tall Oaks right now, and we're seeing the Bioterror outbreak happen, which is a nice homage to Resident Evil 3, and I know you're probably expecting, oh, this is a nice homage to Resident Evil 2, but Resident Evil 2 didn't exactly take place during the start of the outbreak. Resident Evil 3 did, and I think the sequence does it a lot better than Resident Evil 3 because you're really noticing a lot of destructive moments happening with cars smashing into people, like smashing into buildings, and then you have a lot of explosions happening, and then you have these zombies just on fire, and then they're running from everywhere. It really captures the chaos of a bioterror outbreak nicely. But unfortunately, in the minds of an average Resident Evil player of the Resident Evil community, they view such explosive moments as being something equivalent to that of Call of Duty, and people just constantly compare this game to Call of Duty. Like, really? Can you be even more stupid in your mindset? If you're gonna compare Resident Evil 6 to a game, then at least compare it to something that screams above average. Like, if you're gonna compare a mechanically advanced game like Resident Evil 6 to a simplistically designed game series like Call of Duty, then your gaming palette is severely limited if Call of Duty is the first game series that comes to mind. I know all of Carcinogen SDA's fans do this, and so does he, unfortunately. They just judge this game so superficially, unfortunately. But right here, we're gonna get a new weapon, but before that point, we have to get the key. There are certain old scripting moments that occur where you have to examine a door, for instance, that's locked before it actually gives you the prompt to pick up the key. But once you pick up the key, this guy gets up. You can go ahead and deal with him. He's not a problem. He's just a standard zombie. There's the counter system right there. Ooh, and right there, the AI stunned him. That's something I forgot to mention. You can still shoot zombies in the head, and they still flinch. It's just not consistent. Against the Juavos, however, if you shoot the Juavo in the head, they will always get stunned. And the cool thing right there that the AI demonstrated is that she caused a soft stun on the zombie, and then I was able to follow up. That can be really advantageous. You just shoot a zombie in the head or the arm, and then you just kick them, and then you initiate the coup de grace. But we finally get access to the shotgun. The shotgun in this game is not that good. It's not good for crowd control in the slightest. It's very tight when it comes to shooting. And the spread on it is not very wide. But the good news is that the headshot damage is incredible. It's really good at headshotting zombies. But another cool thing about the shotgun is that you can cancel the pump on the shotgun by switching shoulders, by swapping weapons, or by crouching. And by doing this, it will allow you to fire the shotguns incredibly fast. It works with every single weapon on this game. You can fire sniper rifles incredibly fast. You can fire grenade launchers very fast by using the methods I've listed. And it definitely helps against a lot of particular boss fights and against certain enemies. That trick is definitely useful against the first chopper boss fight in Chris's campaign, because that boss is the worst boss on this game. But I'm not going to talk about it right now. This is Leon's campaign. But we had just been introduced to a new enemy type, which was the Shrieker. It's an enemy that has to charge up its scream attack by basically pumping air. And then when he shrieks, it has a massive area of effect, but it doesn't do a lot of damage. It does a bit of partial damage to one of the life cubes. And when you kill it, it unleashes a suicide scream that actually kills a bunch of enemies. But they can do damage to you, so you gotta be careful. But Seraphim 17 doesn't like that enemy type in the slightest because he doesn't understand how that enemy type works. I mean, just because of the fact that it doesn't get stunned from the shotgun does not mean it's a bad enemy. I mean, it's a high-tiered enemy for crying out loud. It responds to stuns differently. And now that I'm talking about the high-tiered enemies, I should talk about the difference between the male characters and the female characters. So the male characters and the female characters, it listed different stuns on the enemies depending on the kind of actions they do. Like, for instance, if you have your back to an enemy and you press R2 as a male character, the character will actually do an elbow attack where they'll basically elbow a zombie and they'll immediately put them into a stun state that allows them to do a coup de grace. When you play as a female character, if you have your back to an enemy and you press R2, they will kick the enemy and it knocks them over every single time. And there are similar cases like that between the different characters. One of the most effective ways of stunning Shriekers and knocking them over is to play as a female character and then do the running kick on them where you basically sprint into them and you press R2 and it will guarantee the stun every time. That's kind of the intended method for dealing with Shriekers. That's what the developers were expecting. So I imagine when you're playing as a male character, trying to get the stun on a Shrieker is pretty difficult. I mean, not that it matters, because when the Shrieker is exposing his weak spot, you can just shoot his red bulge and he'll die instantly. He's a very fair enemy type. But when he's paired with multiple Shriekers, that's really where it gets annoying. And the Shrieker has the ability to force zombies to do the jump attack. And the best way to avoid getting stunned by a Shrieker is to lie down on the ground, because instead of just going into a flinch animation, you will instead just get knocked away while you're on the ground, and it's a significantly faster animation to recover from. That's the best way to avoid Shriekers when it comes to getting stunned by them. And there's a Shrieker right there, so just shoot his red bulge, because he has to fully pump himself with air before actually initiating the attack. And thankfully, his Suicide Scream doesn't have a lot of range, but as long as zombies are near him when he does that Suicide Scream, they will die all the time. That's not the case with all the zombies. The Bloodshots, for instance, which are the upgraded zombies, will not get killed by the Shriek. Oh, and this right here, make sure you stand where I am right now, like on this side of the area, because that ambulance will kill you instantly. There's no quick time event for it. You'll just die. So when it does appear, it's going to spawn a bunch of enemies with guns. The zombies with the guns are not as bad as the Juavos. They're nowhere near as cheap as the Juavos, because they're not as accurate when it comes to shooting, and they can actually damage other enemies. There's friendly fire for the zombies with guns on this game.
Someone shoot the gas.
But right here, make sure you take cover. That's the best way to avoid these guys. And then you have to shoot the gas when the game tells you to. It's really stupid that you can't just shoot the gas prematurely when it just happens to be there. There's a lot of old scripting moments like that on this game, where you have to wait for a specific event to happen before it allows you to interact with said object, like the gas. That's definitely one of my biggest complaints with Resident Evil 6, but it's not an issue that's going to completely destroy the game. But I mean, on a no damage / no life cube loss walkthrough like this, you know, having to wait for that gas can be pretty annoying. But this is the gun shop. This is a nice homage to Resident Evil 2, because of course everyone remembers Kendo's gun shop from Resident Evil 2. Only in this one you're actually having to stand your ground, and you can't just run away. You know, this Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, and 7 on the Not a Hero DLC and the End of Zoe DLC had a lot of moments where you can't just simply run away, which makes perfect sense. You know, honestly, you know, when you notice that all you're doing is just running away from enemies in the game, and you're not really getting put into a lot of situations where the enemies have just trapped you in one of their traps or something, you can really tell that the situation doesn't feel realistic in the slightest. But stand your ground. The enemies are going to come from the windows. They'll also come from certain windows that are near the ceiling. And they can be crawling on the ground, so you got to be careful. The zombies that are on the ground are very dangerous. There's also guys with guns, and be very careful when you're near windows, because the zombies can actually initiate their jump attack from the other side of the window. This is not Resident Evil 5, where the enemies can't attack you behind windows. In this game and in Resident Evil 4, they can attack you on the other side of windows, so you gotta be very careful. But just use all of your systems to your advantage. Use your guns, use the melee, use your evasive actions to your advantage, use the counter system. Your AI partner is really good in this case right here. And so are the other AI. Like, the other AI in this area, they're not too bad. Like, the guns they're using can actually stun the enemies, and they do roughly the same amount of damage as you do. It's just oftentimes they tend to miss with their shots. But at least their shots can be damaging, and they're definitely very helpful when it comes to stunning the enemies. The only time when they're not helpful is when you're trying to set up an enemy for a coup de grace, and then they just screw the stun up. That's the only big problem with the AI on this game. But the fact that they are as capable as you are can be a really good thing. Like, that's something that Naughty Dog is trying to do with The Last of Us Part 2. You know, you don't see a lot of games try to make the AI as capable as you do, and Naughty Dog's trying to really make that clear in The Last of Us Part 2, that they want the AI to feel just as capable as you do. You know, like, it takes 4 shots to kill an enemy. Like, if this was any other game, the AI would have to take, like, 50 shots to actually kill that enemy, but in The Last of Us Part 2, apparently, if it takes 4 shots to kill an enemy, you know, 3 of those shots can be from your friendly AI, and then you can initiate the last shot. That's what I saw in an interview for The Last of Us Part 2. So if they're doing that, that is awesome. Kudos to you, Naughty Dog, for making your AI partner feel helpful, because, I mean, the AI partners in The Last of Us Part 1 were not that good, in all honesty. They were very dumb, and it was all because of the fact that they couldn't die. So I guess that was there for balancing reasons. But back to Resident Evil 6, we're being introduced to a new enemy type. An enemy type that, once again, SHAREfactory doesn't understand a single thing about. He doesn't even try to counter the jump attack, which, if you counter the Bloodshot's jump attack, it will instantly kill it. That is the best way to kill this enemy. But what does SHAREfactory say is a better strategy? Throw an incendiary grenade at him, and it will stun him. Which is true, but it's not the method you want to use. There's the jump attack. The counter system on that is incredibly good, and he's dead. Guarantees an instant kill every single time. You can also choose to counter the uppercut that the Bloodshots do, but it's not that reliable of a method. It does set up the Bloodshot for a coup de grace, but the coup de grace doesn't kill the Bloodshot instantly. So always try to counter the jump attack of the Bloodshots. The best way to do it, by far. And here come these guys. If they happen to grab any of your friendly AI, you can just press circle and do a grapple breaker, and you will get free skill points. On no hope difficulty, the amount of skill points you get is multiplied greatly. But much like with Resident Evil 5, I just don't see the whole point in the skill system. You know, the store on Resident Evil 5 just made Resident Evil 5 so unbalanced, and it just took away a lot of involvement from the game. You know, you were just demolishing enemies, like you were increasing the firepower of your weapons to just decimate enemies, and there were no threats whatsoever, and the skills are no different on this game. Like, there's a skill on this game that allows you to get healed by your AI partner when they revive you. So, in all essence, though, you can just stay alive indefinitely, because when the AI just revives you normally, you do get put into the dying state when you get up. And if you get hit by another enemy after getting revived, you will die instantly, and this is probably the best time to talk about the revive system on this game, because the revive system on this game is very flawed. Because the enemies can still attack you while you're being revived. They will... You're completely invulnerable during the revive animation, but the enemies will just stack attack animations on top of you. So when you recover from the revive animation, you will just get killed immediately. It happens a lot on this game, and not only that, but when you're playing on co-op, if your partner goes down, your screen will start to flash, and then it will go to the camera view of your partner getting downed, and you're completely vulnerable while it's happening, which is so stupid. I don't know why that's the case. That's the same case with Resident Evil 5, but it's not as annoying in Resident Evil 5 because the enemies are a lot more balanced in Resident Evil 5, and in Resident Evil 6, there's just a lot of bullcrap moments with the enemies on this game. I don't understand why it has to flash your screen, and then it has to cut to your partner's camera view every time they go down. It's very unfair, and it's really stupid, and it's very disorienting. And not even holding circle to lock onto your partner can help, because when you swap to your partner's camera view during that down state, it affects your movement. Yet another reason why that system is so dumb. Yeah, I definitely agree with SHAREfactory on that. The revive system on this game is not very good. I mean, unless you're healing them. If you're healing your partner with herbs by pressing R1, and you can actually give your partner multiple herbs by repeatedly tapping R1. If you do that, you're at less risk of getting downed immediately, or just getting killed immediately when you're out of the revive animation. But let's talk about this fight right now. This is a pretty awesome fight right here. This is a very fun fight to do co-op on an M92F only run, or I'm sorry, not M92F, just a regular handgun only run, because the M92F is not in this game. I remember doing this sequence for the first time with Lightning. It was a very fun sequence. It's very hectic, but you just gotta be very cautious when you're doing a no life cube loss run. Counter the enemies when they do their jump attack, because of course you're invulnerable during counter attacks. And the fact that the melee attacks can affect multiple enemies means that if you do a counter attack on a jump attack and there's any enemies nearby, they will just get killed, because when you counter jump attacks at enemies who are directly trying to attack you, the damage is incredible. It does so much damage to enemies. Oh, and that right there is another cool thing. Some of the enemies have grenades on their vests. So if you shoot the grenades, they will die. That is a mechanic they've inherited from Resident Evil 5. It's not as noticeable in this game because there's not a lot of enemies that have grenade packs, but there are a lot of them in the Mercenaries mode, and they can definitely help keep your score up, because if you take too long to kill anything in Mercenaries mode, your score just goes away. Oh, and this is important right here. Stand in this corner after placing the remote bomb, because we're going to be dealing with a Whopper. This is the fat zombie, and wait for him to finish his animation and then use a remote bomb, because he's completely invulnerable during that animation. Servant17 didn't know that, and he completely missed out on the stun. And then when you do stun him, place a remote bomb and then melee him with the coup de grace, because during that entire animation, he's vulnerable to a coup de grace. And then just use the remote bombs again, just repeat the process, and eventually he'll die. This guy has a lot more health than the normal Whopper. The second Whopper that we come across, he dies very fast. This guy, because he's being treated as a boss variant, he has a lot more health. It's like that with some of the other enemy types, like the Napods from Chris's campaign. The very first time you fight Napods, they're a boss variant, so they have a lot more health, and the fight definitely drags out. But that fight has a really cool feature, but I'll discuss it when I get to that fight. But right now, let's just deal with the rest of these enemies. There's a Bloodshot. I saw him coming. I just countered his jump attack because that's incredibly good design. That is the definition of a lethal but fair enemy, because that enemy can be absolutely annoying when he just spams that jump attack. And if he's going to spam it, then therefore there has to be a way to punish it, because it is just completely unfair for enemies to spam an attack like that gives them a lot of range, and they can just do it very fast. You won't be seeing that in Resident Evil 2 Remake, unfortunately. You know, the enemies, you know, they love to spam grab on that game with the zombies, and then the lickers run that incredibly fast. The IVs can instantly kill you if they grab you, and they have a lot of range on their attacks. You know, Mr. X is a very omniscient AI, and, you know, there's a lot of bullcrap moments for the enemies in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and there's not any kind of system to accommodate for that in Resident Evil 2 Remake. That's different than Resident Evil 6. There's a lot of systems to accommodate for some of the bullcrap that the enemies can throw at you in this game. Like the remote bombs. Like, the remote bombs can definitely keep the enemies off you. I mean, you have the counter system, you have the wonderful flinch animations, like, you have the realistic feedback that this game has greatly. So good. Like, this game's combat excels greatly. It exceeds expectations, and so many people just can't recognize this. I just cannot believe that this game just receives so much flack. I mean, I can understand it being kind of repetitive in a lot of areas, because this game, at times, I do feel it can get quite repetitive. But, you just gotta not think about it too much. You just gotta progress with the game at a modest pace, at the pace that actually fits the game, and you won't notice the repetitive gameplay. But the bus is here. I think the bus only comes after you kill a certain number of enemies. I think when you kill the, ooh, look at that right there. That gas tank triggered from the fireman zombie, and it didn't take off more than one life cube, which was very surprising. I wonder why that happened. But as I was saying, I think you have to kill the Whopper and the Bloodshot in order for the bus to actually come faster. I don't know how the trigger works. I don't know if it's kill-based or it's time-based. And then this part right here, you gotta stand in the back area and just go prone, because there's zombies with acid right in front of you, and they will hit you at quite a range. And all you gotta do is just shoot this Whopper, but I believe he's invulnerable before the cutscenes finish. Because every time this Whopper has died, it's never been before these cutscenes that play. It's always been after the cutscenes. Either that, or he's just taking damage, but his minimum HP value is at 1. So, you can damage him, but you can't kill him. Once these cutscenes are finished, then you can actually kill him. But just stay in the back here. Try to use your shotgun, try to use your pistol. I definitely recommend just using the single fire on the pistol, because it's a lot harder to aim at this Whopper when you're dual wielding with your pistols. And Leon is the only character that can dual wield, which is surprising. I wonder why. And his dual wielding function, the quick shot on it is so good. You definitely should use it when you can, but I definitely recommend sticking with the single fire. It helps you save your ammo better, and you're not burning through bullets. And there's a Bloodshot. They can sometimes appear. And there we go. Did it. And I'm about to finish off this Whopper, and that is the end of Chapter 1 of Resident Evil 6. Welcome to this walkthrough. Stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.